To the show today is Will Porter. Will is a staff writer at RT and an extremely frequent guest of this show. And actually, me and Will be starting off today's show with a pretty big announcement, and that is we are rebranding and starting a new show, and it's going to replace Foreign Policy Focused, and it will be the Conflicts of Interest show. So, Will, welcome. How you doing? Big announcement we got for everybody today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, and I'm excited to start this new project with you. Should be fun.
Yeah, and for those of you who are interested in checking it out, maybe I'll go ahead and post a video of the sample show that we did at in the private Facebook group Foreign Policy Focus. And if you would like to, look at it, give us any feedback on what you think, we definitely appreciate that. We'll start sharing out like the social media pages, the Patreon page, the YouTube page. This is going to be a little bit more of a visual show. We will make sure to, put it out in a form that if you're listening audio only, you're not going to miss anything. But we do have a really nice YouTube setup here that I think everybody's going to enjoy. And I think if you're watching it, it's going to add some extra elements to the show. So please check it out, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even if you're not a big YouTube person, subscribe to it on YouTube because the more YouTube subscribers you get, the more the YouTube features you could use. And we do plan on, expanding the show and using all those features to make it a really great project. So, Will, what else do you have to add?
I'm stoked to do it. This is the first time I've ever really done like a video thing. I've gone on a couple of people's shows with the video element, but that'll be a fun thing. The production value is certainly going to be a lot different from a typical podcast. So I think it'll be cool to add that value with this new show.
Right on. Yeah. I think it's the way of the future, and it gives me a chance to sport all of my, cool Liberty, freedom gear. I got my Stop, the Drug War shirt on here, my Free Assange hat on. I need to get a free Snowden hat because Trump's been, it's suddenly after, when Obama was in office, he's like, oh, the evil Snowden. And now he's out there saying that, oh, I'll consider giving him pardon. Some people say he's a traitor, some people not so much. So, you never know what you're going to get with Trump, and you never know if a free Snowden hat will help you get there. So, it's definitely an interesting time, I think, to start a show, especially, it'll really be getting rolling like 3 months out, almost, to the day of the, November election, right? And, because I think we're hoping to do the first official Conflicts of Interest show on August 31st. Hopefully by then I'll be competent enough with putting out these on the live stream that we could actually live stream it as we're recording. Something we definitely hope to do as we get into the show. But there's just so much news to talk about every day, Will. More and more things come out. Just last week, we get this seemingly huge announcement that the media makes out to be a huge deal that, Trump, I've worked out a deal between the Emiratis and the Israelis. Now on the show, we kind of broke down that that's not so much the case, but, that ends up being a huge news story. You got all this Russiagate stuff that gets left behind. And maybe let's go ahead and get into it, start off there on today's show. Just make sure you check out the Libertarian Institute. It includes most of what me and Will put out together, and then my daily news roundup. And make sure to follow Will on any of his social media accounts, Twitter at the Will Porter, and you get his the daily stories that he writes up at RT. But let's move on to this Russiagate story, where former FBI attorney to plead guilty for altering emails in the Russia probe, and this guy is Kevin Kleinsmith. And, it's a very, I think, interesting part of the Russiagate saga here, Will, where, we wonder how did they get this FISA warrant on Carter Page? And it turns out that it took quite a bit of lies and trickery. So what do you think of this plea deal, and why isn't it getting as much attention as, let's say, when Flynn made a plea deal in 2017?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's clear why they don't want to give this too much attention, because this is like one of the clearest cases, I think, where they really they were doing underhanded things to get these warrants to spy on the Trump campaign. I mean, in this case, you had this Kleinsmith guy omitting the fact that Page, who was a campaign advisor for the 2016 Trump campaign, this Kleinsmith guy had omitted information in this FISA application that Page had worked for the CIA, that he had been a source and was known to them, and sort of had been kind of vetted to them. So in trying to spy on Page, they're trying to, they leave off this fact that he had a relationship with the CIA, and trying to sell him as some kind of mysterious Russian asset that was flying under the radar. So I think that's why they don't want to give it too much attention. I mean, you are seeing it, of course, covered in some of the more conservative media, which has been covering a lot of this stuff about the FBI and the FISA malfeasance that happened. But I mean, the fact that this Kleinsmith guy altered this document, we've known this since last year. I mean, the DOJ Inspector General report had uncovered this, and 17, I think in total, 17 areas where the FBI omitted information or misled the FISA court in their pursuance, in pursuing authorization to spy on the Trump campaign. So we've known about this omission for a while, specifically with this Kleinsmith guy. However, the most recent thing is, that he's expected to plead guilty. I don't think he actually has made his plea yet, and I'm not even totally sure when the hearing is, when he's supposed to make that. But he is now, according to these reports, expected to plead guilty.
Right, and we have statements out from his own attorney here saying
Right.
that that's going to be the case. Part of the coverage that I find so interesting, Will, is how generous it is towards him. Even in the Politico article, which I think is probably the most thorough that I've read. They kind of go, well, his lawyer says it was an accident, and they really never challenge that. When, as you say, he deliberately changed the wording of the document, and so he was a CIA. Page was essentially a CIA asset. He was approached by some Russians. He went to the CIA and was like, look, hey guys, whatever I could do to help the U.S. national security. The CIA informed the FBI of this to inform the FISA court. And then rather the guy decided that he would have the FISA court or emailed to his supervisor a version of that CIA document that specifically says that Carter Page may be a Russian asset, when the CIA specifically said that no, he wasn't. He was our asset. It's absurd. And, I think the level of scrutiny this should receive, as this was Donald Trump's presidential campaign, or and then his administration that we're talking about spying on here with this FISA warrant. This isn't just making up evidence to spy on some random drug dealer. Which, look, everybody gets the Fourth Amendment. I'm not saying, but spying on presidents is a big deal, and it just gets away with it. So. Well, I guess this is the first indictment produced from Durham. And I will say, I think he already has a better record than Bob Mueller, because, look, this guy is actually indicted on something to do with Russiagate, not something to do with something else, just about everybody else was in the Mueller probe. And it does seem like, there's something here. But what do you think, Will? Do you think we're going to gain more from John Durham?
I mean, I certainly hope so. I think we've heard the Attorney General, say that more will come out before the election. I think he said by November more is supposed to come out. I don't know what that means, though. If that means some more information or more indictments. If you go and read the charging document, though, for this Kleinsmith guy, it does seem it's very narrow. It doesn't seem like they're, at least in this one case, and maybe they're just doing that to be safe in order to get a conviction or something. They don't want to spoil it by making it too ambitious. But it seems like they're keeping it very narrowly focused on this Kleinsmith guy. They're not tying it into the broader FBI plot. Clearly, the plot to bring down the Trump campaign, or to find dirt, or whatever. These things that we see with Michael Flynn and Carter Page and all this. And so the charging document is staying narrow. I'm not sure if that indicates, though, that they're going to try to keep it focused on this Kleinsmith guy and he's going to be the fall man for all this, or whether they just did that to keep it not too ambitious, so they can actually pursue this in court.
Yeah, I'm hoping so much that we get some real information to come out here, because at this point, I think one of the only ways that more and more Americans will accept that Russiagate was a hoax is if this does go to court, and then you get some official court documents that's John Brennan did something illegal, James Comey did something illegal, And so that's what I'm hoping for. I think our friend Joanne Leone has been a little bit more optimistic about this than I have, and we've had a lot of conversations, me and her, and then the three of us about that topic. But I don't think there's any reason to just be pessimistic and say, we're not going to get anything else. And hopefully things, there was like that, was the guy's name, Stephen Scrange, a couple weeks ago, that Matt Taibbi published one of his op-eds, and there's supposed to be more, where he's arguing that, hey, look, everyone, like there's a lot here, and I'm going to help, to facilitate that coming out. And so it's not a closed deal that it's not going to get better, but John Durham is the guy, as I point out so many times on the show, that helped to cover up the Bush torture program, and so I don't think there's any reason that we should assume he's gonna be an honest actor in all this. Will, anything else on Russiagate? Hopefully, I guess that eventually we do get the truth, and then we could tell everybody, "I told you so," with court documents.
Right, yeah, to what you just said, I think I would just add that, like, I kind of take your position. I'm not super optimistic that, like, the DOJ itself or this Durham probe is going to unearth that much. I mean, they've launched, like, I think 3 or 4 separate probes, apparently, into the whole Russiagate thing, the Trump administration. We haven't really seen much from, I mean, Horowitz had that report, but even in that IG report, he was fairly, like, easy on them. He said, like, oh, there was no evidence of political bias and all this stuff. So I'm a little skeptical that, like, we will get, the ultimate truth from the DOJ or something, or from one of these probes. However, like you said, with that Scrange guy, maybe there are more people out there like that who will, start creeping out of the woodwork with new revelations that we wouldn't have learned from the DOJ.
Right. Or, if Trump's down in the polls, maybe the guy gets desperate and is like, or you got to start throwing some bombs. But let's move on to this story that I actually was hoping that you'll break down, Will. We have one of your articles up here on the screen for anyone watching, but the U.S. sees 4 Iranian gas tankers en route to Venezuela. And then I read a headline and then like a short little, it was one of the very early Reuters wire write-ups, that was like 2 paragraphs long, saying that Iran disputed that any of their tankers with gas aboard got seized. So what's going on here?
Yeah, I'll see if I can't explain that discrepancy, but I'll start just at like the beginning of this. So last week, the DOJ came out and said that the U.S., as you mentioned, had seized these 4 Iranian gasoline tankers that were headed to Venezuela. They claim it's the biggest ever seizure of Iranian fuel. I think it was over like a little over 1 million barrels of gasoline. Of course, the DOJ does not give a whole lot of detail about the seizure itself in their press release. However, they did say that this was done with the help of foreign partners. So that's like an interesting little detail. They don't specify who that is, but this is apparently some kind of joint operation with some U.S. ally. And so we do know that they seized something. They seized 4 ships. Previous to the day before the DOJ came out and confirmed this, the Wall Street Journal had a report on this, and they were the first to give any indication that these vessels had been seized. And they gave a couple more details. That they left it still pretty sparse, but they did say that the ships were taken without any shots fired, with no military force was used. And they claim that the ships are now headed back to a port in Texas, where I guess they're supposed to be they're going to dock and be met by senior Trump administration officials. I guess that's where they're going to try to show off the loot or something. I think they're expected to hold some kind of event there. But Washington has been talking about these gas shipments to Venezuela for a long time now. So we did have some idea that they wanted to do something like this. They issued a warrant to seize gas on 4 tankers last month. And so we did have some indication that they were going to look to do something like this. And it does now appear that they've enforced that same warrant that they were issued in July. However, after the DOJ announcement, like you're saying, the Iranians did come out and kind of issue a semi-denial. I saw both the Iranian ambassador to Venezuela and the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, saying that these ships were not Iranian, that they did not fly under Iranian flags, and that the fuel on board had been sold, and so that wasn't Iran's either. So nothing of these ships was connected to Iran, was kind of their argument. It didn't seem to me that Zarif was denying that it was Iranian gas that was ultimately sold to the ship, but I think he said it was FOB, which means it's out of their hands. It's on this shipper, and it's now the responsibility of some other party. And so I think that was kind of their argument that at this point, none of these vessels and none of this gas was even connected to Iran anymore. And I did look up these ships. I looked up their codes or whatever, their vessel codes, and they're all Liberian flagged. So it's true they're not Iranian flagged. I wasn't actually able to find like who owns them, like what company owns them. Like the public records didn't really show that. I did see some weird like bits and pieces here and there that wasn't really reliable. I don't think I found a couple company names, but didn't find much on them. However, I did read like this very small niche like shipping news website reported that these are all owned by Greek companies. And so it may be true. Iran might not be, they might be honest when they say these are neither Iranian flagged or Iranian owned. And I know that the U.S. has actually sanctioned a few Greek shipping companies in the last couple months for violating Iran sanctions. And so it's possible these were Greek vessels. But despite this kind of like semi-denial from the Iranians, though, like I said, it wasn't totally clear that they were denying that it was their gas at some point. I think they were just saying we didn't own it at that point when it was seized, so this isn't ours. But regardless, I think this is clearly like a pretty steep escalation of the whole maximum pressure thing. I guess on both Iran and Venezuela, because we have sanctions on both of those countries and we target both of their like petroleum sectors. And so even if the ship wasn't technically Iran's at the point that it was seized, I think this is clearly like an escalation of the maximum pressure thing.
Right. Yeah. It seems to be that way. It does seem to be a calculated step, the way you describe it, so that it could be done without enraging the conflict too much. I think if it was an Iranian vessel that got seized, Iran may look to respond, especially in the Strait of Hormuz. And so, from what you're saying, it seems like the Iranian response, rather than to be like, you crossed one of our red lines, we're now going to retaliate, is like, we really don't care about this. It's fine with us. And that's the way that they're trying to portray it. So I guess that's a little bit good news, as far as the cycle goes, because usually once you have one of these steps, it gets worse. I was just looking, and I saw recently that there was a rocket attack on, I think, Camp Taji in Iraq, where there's still U.S. coalition troops housed. And I'm just thinking, oh boy, how are we a few weeks away from another U.S. drone strike on an Iranian asset in Iraq or something like that? Because these things, it starts out a couple months before where that they have a couple rocket attacks, then we bomb some camp that we claim belongs to the perpetrators, and before you know it, there's Iranian missiles hitting U.S. housed bases with in Iraq. So these things can escalate quickly, but it doesn't seem like we went that far, which sounds like good news. Will.
Well, there is actually one caveat to
Okay.
this that like I'm not 100% sure how it ties in or like exactly what happened. However, before any of this stuff was even announced about the Iranian ships being seized on Wednesday, there were reports that Iran had seized a ship near the Strait of Hormuz. That they seized this Liberian flagged ship and they like had detained it for a few hours and let it go. And CENTCOM actually put out like grainy black and white footage claiming that it showed the Iranians boarding this vessel. So it wasn't really clear at the time like what was going on. We didn't know about the 4 Iranian ships that had been seized. But then after the DOJ came out and announced that, oh yeah, we did this, they then accused the Iranians of trying to like recover some of that stolen oil or stolen gasoline by seizing that Liberian flagged ship. And so that's kind of confusing because it's like, why, like, this was not one of the 4 vessels that the U.S. seized. It was a different Liberian flagged vessel. So, like, I don't know why Iran would be under the impression that it had that gasoline on board, or, like, how they wouldn't be able to distinguish it from those other 4 ships. I mean, they have these numbers that you can look up. Like, I was able to just Google it instantly and find out, So it's, I don't know, there's a little bit of confusion and mystery around this, but Iran may have tried to retaliate somehow by detaining this other Liberian flagged ship.
Well, that's something we'll certainly keep our eyes on in the news, Will, and if it seems like it's escalating, we'll continue to talk about it on the show. Another issue going on with Iran, and some of these issues are so hard to talk about, like the U.S. relationship with China, just because it's so crazy how many different issues there are, whether it's the Uyghurs, Tibet, South China Sea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the trade issue, intellectual property. There's all these different things, and so while we're talking about ways that tensions with Iran could escalate, either with rocket strikes in Iraq, or these ships being seized. Or now we have also the U.S. maximum pressure campaign on Iran and trying to extend this arms embargo at the UN. Now, I believe, what was it, in like 2010, as Obama is trying to, essentially use a maximum pressure campaign, although he didn't call it that, and I don't think he went as far as Trump did. But the U.S. put heavy sanctions and got multilateral UN sanctions on Iran during the Obama term, and then attempted to use that to leverage Iran and to enter into the nuclear deal. And so part of all of that was that the arms embargo against Iran was supposed to expire in October of 2020, so long as Iran was complying with the nuclear deal. By all accounts, Iran continues to abide by the nuclear deal. Now, this is with the caveat that the U.S. has significantly, withdrawn, from the deal, and then, imposed sanctions on Iran, so really violated it. And the Iranians have taken steps back from the deal, but they say that's in accordance with what they're allowed to do, because the U.S. has also broken the deal as well. So, we have this interesting vote coming up, because the U.S., I guess, was essentially trying to bully the rest of the world into saying that, hey, you got to go along with these sanctions, whether you want to or not. And we had this big vote. And how did it go for the U.S.?
Yeah, like as most expected, the vote was a total disaster. Like it didn't go through. I think they ended up getting 2 votes in favor. The U.S. itself, and I think the Dominican Republic was the other one that joined us. And like all of our European allies abstained. They didn't even vote. And then I think China and Russia actually vetoed, though they didn't even need to, because like those 2 votes would not have gotten this thing passed regardless. So they didn't even need to actually use their veto power, but they did anyway. And no one expected this vote to succeed, though. Like for a long time, that was sort of the take from most analysts, is like, this is not going to happen, because China and Russia had declared their opposition to it. The European powers, I think, are a little obviously wishy-washy on it. They were not on board with this effort.
Right.
But
no, I just want to point out, Jason did say at antiwar.com, right? Just Germany, France, and Britain, the closest U.S. allies you could get. Hell, we still occupy Germany. We couldn't even get them to go along with this. They abstained.
Yeah, that's right. It seems here they're like, they, I think, care about the, their relationship with Iran, because they're trying to preserve the deal to some extent, the nuclear deal. Because like the Britain, France, and Germany, those are like 3 of the major European parties to the Iran nuclear deal, who are actually, still in the deal, unlike the U.S. is. But now with this vote, miserably failing, the U.S. is now vowing that they're going to like invoke these snapback sanctions on Iran, which would basically it would restore all of the previous UN sanctions that existed prior to the 2015 nuclear deal. And so after this, failed vote, now that they're apparently going to try to push for this. And we should note that the U.S., like Trump, has already imposed all of the American sanctions that existed prior to the deal. Now we're talking about bringing the UN sanctions, which are separate. So they want to bring back the entire sanctions regime prior to the deal. The U.S. does. But it is kind of ridiculous, though, because the U.S. got out of the deal 2 years ago. We abrogated it unilaterally. Yet right now we're now trying to like claim and argue that we are still a party to this deal. So it's like they want to just like, they don't want to have any of the commitments or the obligations under the agreement, but they do want to invoke its terms and try to use its powers and stuff whenever it's convenient. And that's exactly what they're trying to do with the snapback stuff. They're saying we're not, the U.S. is not obligated to give sanctions relief to Iran. However, whenever we decide that Iran's violating something or, whatever, that we're going to invoke the terms of the deal to punish them and to, get these snapback sanctions. And so, if those sanctions are brought back, the UN sanctions, like this could very well kill the nuclear deal altogether. Because at that point, like, why is Iran even in the deal? What's the purpose of what's the point? Because the whole idea was to put limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. And if they're not getting that from the U.S. or from the UN, like, why would they continue to stay in this? I think that's their attitude. Right, and so with these, go ahead.
That makes a lot of sense. And I was just going to say, I think a lot of the stuff I'm wondering with Iran is how much they're just kind of trying to get to November to decide how to act next. I think the Iranians must calculate that, as terrible as a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration will probably be, Obama and Biden were part of the administration that put the Iran nuclear deal in place, and so I don't think he would be more aggressive on Iran than Trump would be. And so that has to change their calculation and their strategy quite a bit. But at the same time, it seems like the U.S. and Israel are increasingly desperate to provoke some kind of reaction by, the Iranians before the election in order to kind of hem in whatever kind of options Joe Biden will have on foreign policy. And, this is only going to be by the U.S. foreign policy consensus. Like, if anybody else took office, no matter what happens in the next 3 months, you could just normalize relations with the Iranians, no problem. But if, let's say, Iran seizes a couple U.S. tankers, then there's no way that Joe Biden will negotiate any kind of nuclear agreement, and will get all kinds of pressure trying to do so until the hostages or the oil tankers or whatever stupid red line gets set is met, and then it won't get met, and relations will just stagnate like the Obama administration in North Korea. So I'm not. There's not like a very bright horizon here, Will. I don't think, unless we can get to November and the Iranians are able to calculate some kind of strategy going forward, I guess.
Yeah, I think maybe some of this does depend on their response here, like you're saying. Like, if Iran does blow its top and some IRGC commander decides like, no, we're going to respond and take back some other vessel or some other incident on the high seas, that could hem in the next administration, definitely.
Right. And that in no way am I trying to endorse Biden foreign policy. I think like
No.
yeah, I honestly I think he's less likely to get us out of Afghanistan than Trump is. There's no way he would consider withdrawing troops from Japan, South Korea, or Germany that we could get from Trump. But at the same time, he may be a little bit better on this one issue. The last story we have here, Will, is on Iraq, and it's something that we talked about last week, where we thought we had this event that would, be a little bit of international news in the weeks ahead. And that is Iraq is now seeking Arab help to expel Turkey from northern Iraq. And this comes after there was a Turkish drone strike that killed two Iraqi members of the border guard that were fairly high ranking in their driver. And so, Will, what's with the latest we have on this over the weekend?
Yeah, so the last time I was on, we talked about how the Iraqi response to this. They're of course not happy about it. They called off a high-level defense meeting. I think the Turkish defense minister was supposed to come meet with them, and they canceled that visit. And they also summoned the Turkish ambassador to kind of chastise him over the strike. But Iraq has kind of done these things before. They've kind of slapped Turkey on the wrists, and yet these things keep happening. And so now this most recent thing, though, the Iraqis have actually gone to the Arab League, asking them to help to, convince Turkey to stop bombing them and to keep their troops on their side of the border. This is, of course, in a diplomatic capacity. They're not asking the Arab League member states to send soldiers there to expel the Turks by force, but they are asking them to put some pressure on them to get them out of there. These various Arab League, regional Arab countries in the Arab League, they're trying to get them to put some pressure on the Turks. And apparently this request has been received pretty well by the Arab League, because I think afterward they put out a statement denouncing the Turkish drone strike and, kind of taking Iraq's side on Arab League. Someone at the Arab League or the League said they would be, they would act in solidarity with the Iraqis. And I think Iraq has also reached out to a few individual Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan and the Saudis. And the Saudis have, I think, come out with a statement as well, taking Iraq's side on this. So it does seem like, some of these regional actors are maybe, aligning behind Iraq on this. Turkey has not really commented on any of this so far. I don't think they've even acknowledged still the killing these two Iraqi border guard commanders. They put out a statement saying that they would do, we talked about last time kind of how Turkey sometimes comes off like the Israelis, and they put out a statement saying exactly we'll do whatever we have to protect our borders and all this stuff, and accusing the Iraqis of harboring terrorists, harboring the PKK in their territory. So Turkey doesn't seem interested at all in stopping these strikes. It's going to need some real persuasion to get them to stop. I think just on Friday, actually, there were reports that they killed 3 Kurdish fighters in Iraqi Kurdistan. In the same area, I think that this other strike took place. It's about 30 miles away from the border. So it's a decent ways into Iraqi Kurdistan. But yeah, they do not seem interested in stopping these things anytime soon. They're just, the Turks, I think, are just going to, I don't think they'll be persuaded to stop.
Right. Well, something that I think it really talked about throughout the history of this show is, kind of how reckless Erdogan has been, the leader of Turkey. It wasn't that many years ago they shot down a Russian jet. And then, this meddling in Libya in the Eastern Mediterranean is significant. And I think is going to start to provoke greater and greater reactions from states that are concerned. I mean, there's a lot of internal strife going on in Lebanon right now, but they have a lot of interest in that area. Cyprus, Greece, France, Egypt, Israel all have significant interest in what happens in the Eastern Mediterranean. And Turkey's out there now just drilling for the oil, and it may be disputed, but Erdogan's like, we're going ahead with it, and anybody who interferes will be punished. I believe they even had what they called a mini collision between the Greek and the Turkish navies over the weekend, which is just crazy. And I think a mini collision means like the ships very slowly floated into each other and clanked. So it
Yeah.
didn't seem like a big deal or anything like that. But these are two NATO states, and a third one, you include France, having standoffs in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea right now. And for as much as everybody blames Trump for destroying NATO, Erdogan seems by far the most chaotic force within that alliance, and the most dangerous and reckless. And hell, he bought the air defense system for Russia. The whole point of the NATO alliance is to hem in Russia, and Turkey buys their air defense system. So, I mean, I think the whole role of Turkey kind of does undermine what's going on in NATO. But sorry to get us so far away from Iraq, because I do think this is an important issue. But yeah, I mean, do you have anything else on that? With like, how are the geopolitics going to play out here? I suppose that other than Syria, these people usually aren't on the same side. The Arabs and Turkey, although it depends on where you go and what you're talking about. Everybody has their own little interest, but Libya is another a conflict ground for these states. Most of them take the side of Khalifa Haftar, while Turkey takes the side of the government of national accord. So what else? How is there really anything that Iraq or the Arab states could do? And what does it say that 17 years, almost 16 years after we overthrew Saddam Hussein, that Iraq has no ability to do anything about this militarily, right? I mean, the U.S. isn't going to support the Iraqis carrying out any kind of strikes against the Turks, and the Iraqis don't have a military to defend their own northern border.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think definitely, like you said, you apologize for getting us away from Iraq, but I would say that, like, the rest of the region is important. I think that determines partially how these other countries will respond. For example, France, they've also weighed in. They butted their way into this situation and denounced the Turkish drone strike that killed the Iraqi commanders. So they're trying to stake out a position here, sort of backing Iraq and being against the Turks. Or taking the Turks to task for this drone strike, and so I guess they see some interest in sort of positioning themselves that way, and I think that is based on a lot of things that are happening elsewhere in the region. Like, I don't know how much France cares that much about a drone strike in northern Iraq, but I think they might be looking for ways to get a jab in at the Turks. Same thing with the Saudis. I think that there have been some tensions between the Saudis and the Turks, and their sort of alliances with other actors in the region. So I don't know exactly how that will dictate how the situation plays out in northern Iraq. I think you're right that the Iraqis don't have any military way to keep the Turks from doing that. The local Kurdish administration, I don't think, does. The PKK fighters, they might be the only ones in any kind of position to resist, but they're just lately been kind of cannon fodder for these drone strikes.
My understanding is the Peshmerga and the Iraqi Kurds are fine with this going on and don't have any particular allegiance to the Syrian Kurds. Like, they're not a homogenous group. And some people talk about creating like a Kurdish state. It's like that thing's gonna be as much a civil war with each other as neighbors. So yeah, that's another complicating factor in all of this, is that while I think at times the Iraqi Kurds and the Turkish and Syrian Kurds have been able to work with something like the Islamic State, or in the past have shared common goals, at this point the Iraqi Kurds do not take up the cause of the Turkish Kurds.
Yeah, no, I don't think like the authorities in Iraqi Kurdistan are too interested in protecting these PKK guys. There's a lot of differences, like even ideologically. The PKK is like a radical left wing, like it's the Kurdistan Workers' Party, and then their breakoff faction in Syria is even more like ideological. They're like an anarchist, some kind of sect. And so, like you said, there's a lot of differences among the Kurds. It's not just one, homogenous, monolithic group. But yeah, so I don't see, Turkey really stopping these strikes anytime soon. I don't think anyone's going to be able to militarily challenge them with that. There might be some diplomatic or trade related thing that some regional country that Saudi could do or something to put pressure on them. But yeah, I personally can't foresee anything that would stop this.
Yep. Well, episodes left now, I guess, of Foreign Policy Focus, where you will be just the guest, but pretty soon you'll be the co-host with me of the Conflicts of Interest podcast. So everybody, me and Will make sure that we're sharing this stuff out this week, but we're at con_interest on Twitter. Conflicts of Interest, just search it on Facebook. We have this nice yellow dove logo. Harley Abbott at Spans Designs did a great job putting that together for us. Conflicts of Interest on YouTube, just search the name, and then patreon.com/conflicts of interest. Will Porter is on Twitter at the Will Porter. I'm at Kyle Anslone_. Will, did I leave anything else out? Forget anything? What else do we need to talk about?
Nope, I think you hit everything. If